What better housewarming could there be for Speed's new home in Charlotte, North Carolina, than to open a new chapter in the long history of American participation in the world's most popular form of motorsport? Welcome to the official presentation of USF1, a new team to represent the United States in the Formula One World Championship. Live inside Studio B here in our Speed Studios in Charlotte. Welcome, everyone. I'm Bob Varsha, your host for Speed's coverage of the Formula One World Championship. And today, it'll be my privilege to introduce you to the men behind the first U.S.-based Formula One team in some 2 decades. And when I say U.S.-based, I mean that literally, a car to be designed and built here in Charlotte, North Carolina, to take on the world. It's an exciting prospect and a huge day for Formula One fans, not only here in America, but around the world. We have a large group of media gathered, including representatives from other countries. Everyone is going to want to know about USF1. But before we question the men behind the effort, we'd like to take a moment to remind you, particularly you new fans to Formula One, that while the USF1 effort may be new, it has a long and often glittering history of Americans in Formula One to build on. The United States has a long history in the Formula One World Championship. In fact, America was part of the modern era of Grand Prix racing from the very beginning. Initially, the USA was considered so important that the first 11 years of the World Championship included the Indianapolis 500, even though the race wasn't run to Formula One regulations. Harry Schell was the first American to start a true Formula One Grand Prix at Monaco in 1950. Soon, American drivers were appearing regularly on the podium, the first being Maston Gregory at Monaco in 1957. Enzo Ferrari recognized American driving talent. In 1958, Phil Hill made his debut with the prancing horse, delighting the Tifosi with a podium finish at Monza. In 1959, Dan Gurney nearly duplicated Hill's feat, finishing on the podium in just his second race with the team. Hill is synonymous with Ferrari in that era, becoming the first American driver to win a Formula One World Championship race at the 1960 Italian Grand Prix. 12 months later, he would be crowned America's first world champion. Gurney kept the U.S. flag flying at the pinnacle of motorsport. He became one of only 2 drivers to score the first Grand Prix victories for 3 different constructors, winning the French Grand Prix at Rouen for Porsche in 1962, and repeating the feat 2 years later for Brabham. Finally, in 1967, in the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, Gurney reached the pinnacle of national racing pride, winning in his very own All-American Racers Eagle. In the meantime, Richie Ginther joined the ranks of race-winning American drivers with victory in Mexico in 1965, also the first for Goodyear tires, an American brand that is by far the most successful tire in series history. The most significant engine ever built for Formula One was made possible by American investment. The Ford Cosworth DFV would never have happened if not for the support of the Ford Motor Company. The DFV won its debut race in 1967 in a Lotus driven by Jim Clark in the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort, and went on to power world champions in 12 of the next 15 seasons, racking up 155 victories, second only to Ferrari. In the late 60s, a new wave of American drivers flooded the Formula One market. Mario Andretti announced his arrival by taking pole position for the U.S. Grand Prix at Watkins Glen in 1968 in his debut. By 1971, he was racing and winning for Enzo Ferrari. Mario was soon joined on the grid by Peter Revson, who in 1973 earned the distinction of winning 2 races for McLaren under an American team boss, Teddy Mayer, using an American engine, the DFV, on American Goodyear tires. In addition to Revson's heroics, McLaren drivers Emerson Fittipaldi and James Hunt claimed world championships under Mayer's stewardship. But Teddy Mayer was not the only American on the pit wall during the time. Parnelli Jones and partner Vel Meletic created a Formula One car in 1974 driven by Andretti. Roger Penske also entered the series that year and eventually made the breakthrough that Parnelli couldn't when John Watson won for Penske in Austria in 1976. 1978 was a banner year for American Formula One involvement as Mario Andretti drove the innovative Lotus 79 to America's second world championship. In the 1980s, Eddie Cheever raced in 132 Grand Prix, the most ever by an American driver, scoring podium finishes along the way. Cheever certainly had plenty of opportunities to race in front of his home crowd, as the USA has provided 9 different venues for Formula One races, more than any other country. They include such legendary circuits as Watkins Glen, Long Beach, and of course, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. 1993 brought the arrival of IndyCar champion Michael Andretti to McLaren. Though Michael's brief stint alongside world champion Ayrton Senna proved less successful than planned, he provided a flash of what might have been by finishing 3rd at Monza. The late 80s and early 90s were the golden era of American technical contribution to Formula One. In a 10-year period, Goodyear won 177 of 178 races, leaving the sport in 1998 with 368 victories, more than double those of any other tire supplier. The era of Ford customer teams was also drawing to a close, but the company was still a force. In 1994, Michael Schumacher clinched his first driving title for the Benetton team with Ford Power. While technical success may not ignite the fire in the belly of a race fan, any notion that Americans had lost interest in Formula One evaporated in September of 2000 when the sport returned to the USA after a 9-year absence. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway hosted a crowd of more than 225,000, the largest in the modern era of Formula One racing. In 2006, Scott Speed became the first American driver since Michael Andretti. But by 2008, both Speed and the USGP were gone. American Formula One fans may look back on these and other chapters in the history of the sport and wonder, when will our flag wave again over the Grand Prix tracks of the world? And who will carry it? The answer begins today. Well, as we've just seen, the bar's been set pretty high for any American taking part in the Formula One World Championship. And remember those names, Mario Andretti and Dan Gurney. We'll be hearing from both gentlemen later on. Right now, let's meet the men behind the USF1 project. And each has a resume longer than we have time to talk about in detail, but we'll do our best. To my left, Ken Anderson, longtime engineer and designer with vast experience in IndyCars, technical director for 2 Formula One teams, and experience not only in motorcycles, off-road, NASCAR, and a whole lot more. And not least, designer and builder of the Wind Shear Wind Tunnel here in North Carolina, a 100% scale rolling road wind tunnel that is easily the best in the world and has been visited by Formula One teams in the past. Ken, welcome.
Thank you.
To his left, a man who needs no introduction to speed fans, our Formula One pit lane reporter, Peter Windsor. And if you think Peter is just a journalist who's taking a holiday going racing, you're wrong. Peter has been a team manager with Williams. He has worked for Ferrari, both on the management front as well as sponsor relations and a whole lot more. Peter, welcome to you. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Bob.
Ready for Melbourne?
Absolutely. Can't wait.
Okay. Well, let's get to the matter at hand. Perhaps you can give us an idea, Peter, of how we've gotten to this point.
Well, how we've gotten to this point, actually, it's quite emotional watching all that footage of the Americans in Formula One, because without those guys, Ken and I wouldn't be here today, that's for sure, because both of us grew up with a passion for Formula One, and names like Maston Gregory, Richie Ginther, you know, what they achieved, Peter Revson, apart from the great names like Dan and Mario and Phil Hill, that's what it's all about. But how do you do a Formula One team? That's an interesting question. There's no book about it. There's lots of books on how to drive a race car, perhaps, but no books on how to do a Formula One team. But if you look at the way it's gone in the past, in the recent past, it's been either find an incredibly rich trillionaire and have him dominate the team, own the team, and if you're lucky enough, you get a job once you put the team together, or you are lucky enough to be invited by a car company, a large car company, to set up their Formula One operation for them. Ken and I have been around long enough, really, not to want to do either of those two things. I can only speak for myself, but I think Ken would agree.
Absolutely.
And we always wanted to do our own team our way. It sounds very arrogant, perhaps, but you know, we have got some history. We've got some things that we want to bring into the sport that we think we can do well. But the key to that, of course, was not selling anything more than a very small stake in the team. So we set some unbelievably steep hills to climb in the recession. We just wanted to sell off a small part of the team. And I'm pleased to say that as we sit here now, we've done that, and we're now 2 guys that can say we're going to do a Formula One team because we've got the capital to do it. And to some extent, the recession's kind of helped us a little bit. We can talk about that a bit later on.
Sure.
But I think for those of them out there that say, where's all the money? Where's the huge facility? Where's the money pouring out of the sky? That ain't even going to happen with USF1. We've always had a very different approach, and that approach will become visible, I think, as time goes on and this year unfolds.
Okay, we'll get to questions from the media in just a moment, but Ken, I'd like to ask you, the obvious question is, an American-based Formula One team, why would you set up an operation like this an ocean away from where the rest of the teams reside?
Well, most of the technology in Formula One comes from the United States to begin with, and the logistics side of it now, as of next year, less than half the races will be on the continent, so there's less reason for being there. The cost of doing business in the United States is significantly cheaper than Europe, and there's a lot of good people here.
A fan might wonder about travel times back and forth. Just putting the costs aside for a moment, the idea of building a car here and racing it there, how would that be accomplished?
Well, you know, we live in an age of FedEx, DHL, you know, UPS. The logistics side is actually pretty simple. Whether you're traveling, it just took me 20 hours to get back from San Francisco the other day with all the delays and stuff. I mean, anybody that travels a lot now is, you know, used to it. And it's, whether you're going to Australia from here or England is kind of a moot point. There's so many things in the Pacific Rim, you know, Southern Hemisphere. It's a long way either way.
And if I can just add here, I think that we should also point out that if you take a race like, say, the Spanish Grand Prix, the Monaco Grand Prix, with the logistics we have, we'll have our cars back in Charlotte sooner than most of the British-based teams will have their trucks back at their factories in England.
Yeah,
actually, you know,
ferry them across, and
yeah.
It's no piece of cake over there either. So.
Let me also ask, at the risk of alienating the media who are waiting for their turn, the idea of locating in Charlotte, North Carolina, so closely associated with NASCAR, not a series known for high-tech cars, engines, and so forth. But Ken, you and I talked about this earlier. That's really a misunderstanding of the reality of the situation. There is an awful lot of racing high-tech in this area.
Absolutely. There's probably more. I mean, racing's a $6 billion industry in North Carolina. It's probably within 50 miles of Charlotte. It's all there. It's actually very, very difficult. It's pretty easy to build a 4-valve twin-cam racing motor. To try to take a push-rod, 2-valve, you know, something cast iron block, and get the sort of horsepower and the rest together. There's some brilliant people here. And in terms of test equipment, a shaker rig doesn't know whether it's got a cup car on it or a Formula One car. A wind tunnel doesn't know. KNC rig doesn't know. So the benefit of that is we have more equipment, more talented people in this area than I'd say anywhere in the planet.
And as I mentioned earlier, the USF1 team shirts will not be the first from Formula One teams to come visit the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area. You've seen a few Formula One teams at your facility. Absolutely,
absolutely. Can't name names, but been quite a few Formula One teams, and very happy with winch to the wind tunnel. But there's also a lot of suppliers to Formula One are here. McLaren Electronics has a facility in Mooresville. You know, just to say there's Gunter Steiner, who is the technical director at Red Bull and Jaguar. You know, we meet at the coffee shop in Davidson regularly. You know, there's a lot more people here than people realize.
Okay, with that, we'd like to open it to questions from the floor. Once again, if you'll wait for a microphone and then tell us who you are, who you represent. Would you stand, please?
Good afternoon. Tom Jensen, SpeedTV.com. Gentlemen, who's going to drive your cars, and when might we expect some announcements?
Well, these are all the fun things. You know, we've been going through the growth pains of this team have been going back 2-3 years and included the windshield tunnel. And I only say that because drivers, engines, sponsors, they're all the fun bits of a race team, if you like. I mean, they're not easy. It's a huge thing. But Ken and I have, when we realized that the technology was here and that with the help of the FIA's new regulations, which are just made really for new teams to come into the sport, we therefore could do a team here in the United States, and it was going to be a car made in America. The logical thing from a marketing point of view was then to see if we could have 2 American drivers, and that's what we intend to do. And a lot of people, I think, will throw their hands up and say, how can you do that? Of course, we don't have any American drivers in Formula One right now, so by definition, the 2 guys, the 2 people we will have in the car in 2010 will be inexperienced, relatively inexperienced, and will be rusty. They won't have a lot of road dust on them. But at the same time, we're going to stick to that. We're a young team. Nothing wrong with having young drivers growing at the same pace. The answer to the question is we haven't made any decision on drivers yet. your guess is as good as mine, because there's a list out there of American drivers with the right credentials to race in Formula One who have the talent. They prove they've got the talent already. It's a question of finding the two most compatible drivers with what we're setting out to achieve and do in year 1 and year 2 probably, and grow with us. So that's all a great discussion point. You know, all the drivers out there. If one had to take names now, the next generation looks really good. You got Alex Rossi, who obviously won a lot of races in Formula BMW. You got Connor Daly, Joseph Newgarden, really 3 talented young guys. Gabby Chavez, also very good. And if you take a level slightly higher than that, Jonathan Somerton has won at international level already in A1GP, driving for the Team USA operation. Very talented, and he's already raced in Europe. He's raced in Formula 3 with Sebastian Buemi as his teammate and done very well alongside him. Scott Speed has got Formula 1 experience. We know Scott. He's a very talented guy. He's doing very well in NASCAR right now. It'd be interesting to know if he's totally comfortable here now. Sky's the limit. You know, there are NASCAR drivers out there who I really think, and Ken agrees with me, you know, if they wanted to switch to Formula 1, we could groom them and we could help them make that change. You know, it would be lovely. We were chatting with Dave Despain the other night about Kyle Busch, for example. I mean, what a great star he would be. I mean, Formula 1 would welcome anything like that. Danica Patrick is another name that has to be considered for what she's achieved. And again, she's raced in Europe and she's done it the hard way.
You are certainly sparking conspiracy theorists on the internet, I can tell you that right now. We have another question. Yes, over here.
Eric Spanberg, yeah, Business Journal here in town. For those of us weaned on NASCAR, can you give us a little idea of what the scope is in terms of how many employees, size of budget, what it costs to run an F1 team compared to what you see in NASCAR?
Well, that's good. It's compared to what you see in NASCAR, not Formula 1. Yeah, that's a good question.
That's a very good question. We're looking at well over 100 people, highly skilled, highly paid people.
Not too highly paid.
Well,
for comparison, I mean, the big Formula 1 teams right now run about 1,000 people, and you think you can do it with a fraction
well, I
of
mean,
that?
it depends on how you look at that too. A lot of that, you know, there's so much. If you're doing your own engine, McLaren does a lot of things other than racing, for instance. So, starting from like Peter said, with a skunkworks approach to it. You know, we want the minimum amount of the best people, but then there's also quite a lot of vendors. Even though we only have 100, 120 people in-house here, there's dozens and dozens of vendors that we can rely on that would add up to several hundred people.
Right now, we want to invite one of those gentlemen I talked about earlier. 1978 Formula 1 world champion Mario Andretti is with us via telephone. Mario, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well.
Great, Mario. Great to have you with us. Thanks very much for joining us. Would you give us your thoughts, please, about the idea of USF1?
I'm excited. Obviously, I've been following some of the rumors the best way I could, and finally, a couple of days ago, Peter called me and confirmed that this is, in fact, the reality, and told me about the announcement today. So. I said clearly this is the best news that I could have hoped for as a Formula 1 fan, absolute supporter of that, and I'm sure it's great news for all of the American Formula 1 fans, and it's got to be great news for Formula 1, period. So it's all positive, and I've been listening to obviously the logistics, everything that's been explained, and it all makes sense. You have two gentlemen there that know the reality of the sport. They know it inside out. They're not just dreamers. And they have the credibility to support this. And I, for one, for whatever it's worth, I'm totally behind you guys.
Thank you
Mario,
very much.
Your grandson Marco is a name that obviously would be on anybody's list of young drivers with the dream of racing in Formula 1. Let me put a little spin on that question, if I could, and ask you, what would it mean to you as the '78 world champion, whose son Michael made the podium at Monza in 1993? What would it mean to you to see Marco in a Formula 1 car?
I would just love that. It would rejuvenate me in so many ways. You know, my ultimate love has always been and always will be Formula 1. And in fact, I know Marco has not expressed himself probably enough. He just wants results to speak for themselves first and then go from there. But every time that we mentioned, and I mentioned the possibility, I said, I'd give anything, to have this opportunity. And I said this before, and I'll say it again, and I'll back it up, that, if I were to design a Formula One driver today, I would design Marco. He learns quickly. He's just very much of a free spirit, whereby, the travel, all of that aspect does not faze him in the least. And he's just, and he's certainly one that wants to do it, wants to excel in it, and we'll see where the future brings for him. Right now, I think he has to get some results where he is with his dad in the Indy cars, and we'll see where that takes us then.
All right, thank you very much, Mario. We appreciate you dropping in and talking with us. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mario.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions from the floor for Ken? Dan, let's get a microphone to Dan. I'm sorry, over here.
This is Steve Post with Raceline. My question is, we've shown about the on and off history of American involvement, the on and off history of the events in America. What are the challenges with not currently having a home race or a race here in the United States?
Well, from our point of view, we've never seen that as a problem. We've always set out, we've always believed that what we're trying to do is take the United States to Formula One again, in the footsteps of Mario and Dan and the American history in Formula One. We're not trying to take Formula One to the United States and convert hundreds of thousands of fans or millions of fans to Formula One. We hope that'll happen on the back of USF1 and what's going on with USF1. And we sincerely hope that having a US Grand Prix here again will be a byproduct of that, and nothing would be better for us, nothing would be better for American motorsport. But that is very much in the hands of FOM, of Bernie Ecclestone. He does a brilliant job in the way he stages and places Grand Prix around the world. Each country that stages a race these days effectively stages it as a mini Olympic Games. They don't have the Olympics, so they have a Formula One race, a round of the Formula One World Championship. And that's what makes Formula One as big as it is, as a television global sport. America's got to play that role, in effect. Let's hope President Obama decides that we've got to have a US Grand Prix and the federal government will get behind it. I guess that's wishful thinking, but it would be fabulous. But yeah.
Another question.
Dan.
Excuse me, Dan has the mic.
Dan Knutson, National Speed Sport News and ESPN.com. Peter, what sort of support have you got from the two most powerful men in F1, Bernie Ecclestone and Max Mosley?
It's a very good question, Dan. You normally ask questions of everybody, though. I'm surprised you just asked me. Well, I first told Bernie Ecclestone about this in Brazil '06, and he was his usual specific self. He just said, "Great, get it done." And so I said, "Okay, let's go and do it." And we've kept him in touch ever since, and he's always been very supportive. Anything that we need, he's tried to help us with. A good example was the DVD of the lovely edit he did on the '08 Formula One season, which we've been using in some of our presentations to investors here in the United States. Not for commercial use, but that's a typical example of the sort of help he's been giving us, and that's quite a big thing coming from FOM, and we've kept him in touch with what we're doing. He's very supportive. And the FIA equally, they've known about this in detail now for about 5 to 6 months, and instantly grasped the program and instantly accepted the way we wanted to do it as, dare I say it, the poster child of how a Formula One team should be going into the next generation, facing the recession, the rule changes, how we're approaching it, the lean, mean, skunk works approach, is exactly the sort of thing that the FIA are looking for, so they say, for the future. And so we're working very closely with the FIA in every area of the team. We're keeping them informed of how we're doing the team, how we're selling the stake of the team, the budgets involved, and having said that, we've assumed nothing in the budgets, and we've got a very realistic approach to the commercial side. But Max Mosley, and particularly Nick Craw, who's now vice president of the FIA, based in Denver, Colorado, that's a great thing for American motorsport. He's done a fabulous job for ACUS over the years, and to have Nick now in such a strong position on the world motorsport stage, I think it can only help us, and it's a great timely move for American motorsport.
Question?
Bud Hughes from Lanier Technical College in Oakwood, Georgia. What would the opportunities be for young American mechanics on your team?
Endless. We're always looking for good people. You know, we're going to have a system to train people up. You know, we're obviously going to be hiring a lot of experienced people, but you know, there's no reason. I mean, there's so many good people in this country, and all the way down to aircraft mechanics. You don't have to be from a race team to be a good mechanic, and sky's the limit.
And so much of what's involved in Formula One, particularly from an aerodynamic perspective, finds people coming from businesses like aerospace and nuclear engineering and all that sort of thing.
We can build stealth fighters here. We can certainly put a Formula One car together. So.
Now, the goal is to put a car on the grid in the 2010 season. Let's talk a little bit about timelines and perhaps deadlines. What goals have you set for yourself in terms of when you reach the point of no return, if it's out there?
Well, we've come up with a timeline for the year, obviously, by which time decisions have to be made. But as I say, they're all things that race teams do anyway. I mean, they're not things that are going to be massively difficult to achieve now that we are where we are. You know, we are a team, we have a budget, and we're going to be spending that in the correct way, achieving those goals when they need to be achieved. In no particular order. They're going to be drivers, engines, European location, the building here, sponsors, all those things are things to be doing now. You know, that's what we're now going to be doing from 09 onwards. And drivers are going to be the fun thing, aren't they? I mean, we mentioned Marco, we didn't mention Graham Rahal, another driver out there, the son of a great American star. You know, there are so many great things to be doing. Just can't wait to get down to the local Starbucks and start having more meetings. You know, that's what we've been meeting for the last 3 years. And you know, we're going to be that sort of team. You know, we're just going to be, because we're not, you know, one individual dominating the team. We're going to do it the way racing people do it. And there's all these great people to meet and talk about. Engines is obviously something we're going to have to look at pretty quickly. And maybe Ken, talk about how we're going to approach the engine situation. Yeah, we're going to send out a proposal to all the manufacturers currently in Formula One and let them know we're here and would entertain sitting down with them. And because every manufacturer in Formula One now, their biggest market is the United States. The only exception to that would be Renault, but they're having an alliance with Nissan, so it could make commercial sense for them. So.
And you have no preference between engine manufacturers?
Not at this point, no.
Okay. A question from the floor.
Yeah, Ryan McGee with ESPN The Magazine. 2 questions. Number 1, shop location here in Charlotte, has that been determined yet? And number 2, you mentioned, Peter, the good timing of the recession right now. There are a lot of out-of-work people in racing in the Charlotte area right now. Are you already in contact with some of those folks?
Well, Ken, perhaps you could talk about the recession and how that actually...
Yeah, I mean, the trickle-down of a year ago, carbon fiber there's a big shortage of carbon fiber because all the airplanes were sucking it up. Now that people have canceled airplanes, there's a glut of carbon fiber, and it's cheaper than ever. That's just one example. People, as you say, there's a lot of good people on the market here. The building, there's one building we particularly like we're working on, and there's lots of real estate available in Charlotte right now. So
I hope it's not too far away from our studios here at Speed.
No, we're like, it's pretty close.
And I think there's one other aspect to the recession as well, which is an ironic aspect, and it's that if we were in a boom period right now, and money was falling out of the sky, and there was a queue of teams a lineup of teams wanting to do Formula One. And lots of trillionaires out there, all being enticed by the glamour of Formula One. It will be very difficult for guys like Ken and me to put our hands up and say, we can do a team efficiently, lean, mean, skunk works approach. We can do it in America. We can do it very differently from everybody else. We just get laughed off the ballpark because it's not the way you do a Formula One team. But the fact that we're in the recession, and don't forget we started this team long before the recession was even heard of, the fact that we are in a recession means that people actually listen to us now and they take us seriously, because what we're saying actually adds up. If you combine that with the way the FIA have approached the recession, the way they've changed the way a new team can get into Formula One, the cost of doing Formula One, the cost of starting up a new team is now dramatically different to the old $48 million bond days. I mean, forget those days. Forget the $100 million budgets. Forget the $30 million retainers for drivers. Over the next 3 to 4 years, it's going to change dramatically in Formula One, and that's our period.
With regard to jobs in Formula One, I have to get this out quickly because my email box at Speed has become the unofficial repository of everybody from, well-intentioned Formula One enthusiasts who just want to get involved with USF1, all the way up to some fairly technically competent people. What will be the plan going forward when you decide to start hiring?
Well, thanks, Ken.
Great job.
I've been in Formula One since 1972. Ken's been around for almost as long. And we both have, like most racing people, not only just in Formula One, we all have groups of people with whom we work and who we're comfortable with. And if we ever do something, that's the group that you plug into what you're doing. And Ken's no different. I'm no different from that. And Ken's got his own team of guys, initial guys that we'll be plugging in on the engineering side. And that is the first part of this project. Obviously, is the detailed design. Let's get all that done and then start the manufacturing process. And then we evolve from there in a very organic way. And the same, I mean, loosely, Ken is the team principal. Make that absolutely clear from this point. And I'm the sporting director, but he's also in charge of the engineering side of the company. And we will both evolve in this lovely organic way that Formula One teams today can't do, because they're so big and they have so much money and so many different tangents in which they operate. I mean, it's a great thing if you're doing well with that, like McLaren, Ferrari, BMW, but it's a very difficult monster to control.
Right. And in that connection, it's probably worth noting that until you actually enter the World Championship, hopefully for 2010, you're not bound by any of the current restrictions on Formula One teams in terms of wind tunnel time, track testing, all that sort of thing. If you get a car out there, you can go whomping around all you want, I would assume.
Yep.
Well,
to a point. I mean, we certainly have to respect the intent of the rule, and and we certainly won't make anybody mad at us going in.
We have another question out here on the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. This is Diego Mejia with Autosport.com. Probably the question is for Ken. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of the logistics, you know, of going around the world with the team, but also in terms of the development of the car? I mean, you're going to have two bases. We know there's a frantic pace on the development of an F1 car. How's that going to work with the team next year?
The development of the car? We have probably more tools in a 50-mile race here than anywhere in the world in terms of, like as I said before, the chassis dynos, shaker rigs, KNC rigs, the best wind tunnel in the world, great people, software. We have some fantastic partners signed up already in the software side, the hardware side, and the computer simulations. Most Formula One teams use American CFD software, American simulation software. And the good thing, being so open like we will be versus keeping it a secret from the European teams, these companies are just chomping at the bit to work with us because they'll get a lot more exposure from us.
CFD being computational fluid dynamics, essentially a wind tunnel in a computer.
Exactly.
One of the things you and I talked about, Peter, about making this team different from Formula One is your approach to the media and the fans. Tell me a little bit about how accessible USF1 will be.
Well, it's certainly something that I've learned just in the time I've been here in Charlotte over the last year and a half is how good a job the NASCAR teams do for the fans. And we're in the entertainment business. We've been reminding one another of that from day one. And we want this to be entertainment. We want it to be a TV-led Formula One team, if you like, a TV show-led team. And we're going to be that by definition, being so close to speed here. And we're also going to have our own TV production facilities inside our factory headquarters. So we're going to make this a very fan-friendly team, not only in the States, but globally. But yeah, we're going to design the fan route. Fans are going to be welcome to come to our headquarters. There'll be a tour that they can do. They can look at the car being designed and built. They can touch and feel a Formula One team for the first time. And it'll be a lovely experience, I think, to come here. We'll have a state-of-the-art facility that'll be as good as anything you'll see in Europe. It won't be McLaren, it won't be Ferrari, because obviously we have no history, but we'll do it our way that's compatible with being here in the United States. But if you look at guys like Michael Waltrip, the way they've operated their team, the way they do that, you know, that is a case study on how to make motor racing and Formula One in our case. The fans love it. And I think one of the problems with Formula One is that the way Formula One teams present themselves in America, it's always been very difficult for the fans to grasp what Formula One's all about. It's very technical, lots of money, but nobody ever talks about it. You can never see the technology, and then they go racing, and isn't it wonderful? And maybe 5 cars race, or maybe 26 cars race, and then they all disappear again. And you know, it'll be, obviously we have an opportunity here to sell Formula One to our fan base. And we've got a lot of Formula One fans here, and I think we all know that from Speed, how many emails we get and how much support we get when we had that race at Indianapolis, when we did that show on the Thursdays, and the fans, and the lineup of people buying Scott Speed merchandise, bless him, you know, and Scott was not having a good time, but it was 300 yards long.
Well, you mentioned Formula One history, and while USF1 may not have much, it has a lot of American participation to fall back on. And in connection with that, we'd like to hear now from a gentleman I mentioned earlier, Dan Gurney, a winner in Formula One and perhaps one of the most active Americans in recent years in trying to get the United States back into Formula One. Earlier this week, Dan gave us his thoughts on Ken and Peter's chances of developing a U.S. Formula One contender.
I have no doubt whatsoever that American effort can be competitive. American effort can be more than competitive, it can be winning. At this point in time, there's a huge yearning for an American effort. I feel that Bernie and Max are still powerful, and they have vision for the future of that particular business from a global standpoint, and that's what they feel it would be a huge asset. And I think that they're going to be as supportive as they possibly can be. Kenny Anderson has confirmed his own credibility, and I feel that that's very important. The fact that he built probably the world's best automotive wind tunnel, the full-scale wind tunnel, was a huge. That was halfway to the moon practically, and the fact that he pulled it off is that did a great deal for me. And his thoughts and his involving American technology is a very important thing. I have great confidence in the team that he's putting together. Peter Windsor is a very appealing young man that they talk about, what was it, Tom Lasorda, he used to bleed Dodger blue. Well, he bleeds Formula One red, and you can feel it. It's a genuine thing, and he's a very, very good student of it. I just feel that he's a huge asset to the team, and the knowledge that he has built up, and the credibility that he has maintained and improved on is all very, very positive. No one can tell you how often opportunity is going to knock, but if you're ready, when that moment comes, you can step up and say, okay, we're going to go for it. And we can do it here in this country without a shadow of a doubt. And then, I mean, over there, they're watching us all the time. But, and they come over and pluck whatever new ideas they'd like to come, because we're so open. But it doesn't mean we haven't told them everything.
Well, I think you can sense Dan Gurney's enthusiasm for the project, and we thank Dan for his thoughts. And with that, we will bring the live portion of this press conference to a close. I'd like to thank Ken Anderson and Peter Windsor for joining us here today. Thank you. You can be sure that Speed and SpeedTV.com will be all over the development of the USF1 project, and we hope you'll be with us every step of the way for that. We also hope you'll be with us for the first round of the Formula One World Championship in 2009. That will, of course, be the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne. Practice, qualifying, and the race itself right here on Speed, so check your local listings. Once again, thank you all for joining us. In a moment, we'll let the media have their one-on-ones with our special guests, and we thank you for joining us out there in viewerland. Until Melbourne then, I'm Bob Varsha. So long from Speed headquarters in Charlotte, North Carolina.